I was standing in my kitchen making morning coffee when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery outside. At first, I thought it was just another neighbor getting some landscaping done. But when the sound got closer and closer to my backyard, I knew something was wrong. I rushed to my window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. A concrete truck was backing up toward my historic well, and standing right beside it with a clipboard was Linda Morrison, our HOA president, wearing her signature leopard print outfit and that smug smile I'd come to hate. "Stop. What are you doing?" I screamed as I ran outside in my pajamas and slippers. But it was too late. Gray concrete was already pouring out of the truck's chute, filling up my beautiful 150-year-old well. The same well I had spent 2 years restoring by hand. The same well that was legally protected as a historic structure. The same well that Linda had been trying to force me to remove for months. "This is for neighborhood safety and uniformity," Linda announced loudly, waving her clipboard like she was conducting an orchestra. "Your ugly old well is finally gone." I stood there watching my well disappear under tons of concrete, feeling like someone had just burned down my house. My wife Sarah came running out and gasped when she saw what was happening. The concrete truck driver looked uncomfortable, like he knew this wasn't right but had already been paid to do the job. "You can't do this," I shouted at Linda. "This is my property. This well is historically protected." Linda just laughed. "Mr. Peterson, I have full HOA board approval for this community improvement project. Your well was a safety hazard and an eyesore. Now it's properly dealt with." She handed me a paper from her clipboard. "Here's your citation for maintaining dangerous structures on HOA property. The fine is $500, due in 30 days. I was so angry I could barely speak. But Linda wasn't done yet. "And since you clearly don't understand community standards," she continued, "I'm also citing you for excessive water usage. Using private wells violates our water conservation policies." That's when I realized this wasn't just about the well. This was about control. Linda couldn't stand that I had something she couldn't regulate, my own private water source that didn't depend on the HOA's overpriced utility contracts. What Linda didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because that well wasn't just my private property, it was connected to something that would give me power over her entire neighborhood. Let me back up and explain how this whole mess started. 6 months earlier, Sarah and I had bought our dream house in Willowbrook Gardens, a planned community outside Dallas. The house came with something special, a historic hand-dug well from the 1870s that still produced clean, fresh water. While our neighbors paid sky-high rates for city water through the HOA's utility contract, we had our own free, unlimited supply. The well was beautiful too. We had restored the original stone walls, installed a vintage hand pump, and even built a small garden around it. Visitors always commented on how charming it looked, like something from an old fairy tale. But from day one, Linda Morrison hated it. Linda was the kind of HOA president who treated community rules like religious law. She had been in charge for 6 years and ran the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Every blade of grass had to be the right height. Every mailbox had to be the right color. Every flower bed had to match her approved plant list. And my well didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. The complaints started immediately. First, she said the well was a visual distraction that didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Then she claimed it was a safety hazard because children might fall in, even though it had a locked cover and was surrounded by a fence. When those arguments didn't work, she tried saying the well violated water usage policies. She sent me official letters demanding I connect to the city water system and abandon the well. When I refused, the citations started coming. Every week there was something new. The well cover was the wrong color. The garden around it had unapproved plants. The hand pump was too tall and blocked sight lines. The fines added up quickly, $100 here, $200 there. I fought every citation and won every appeal. The well was historically protected, legally permitted, and completely on my own property. Linda had no authority over it whatsoever. But Linda wasn't the type to accept defeat. She doubled down, holding special board meetings about water policy enforcement, and sending threatening letters about community action if I didn't comply. The final letter arrived just a week before the concrete truck incident. It said, "Mr. Peterson, your continued violation of community water standards cannot be tolerated. The HOA board will take whatever action necessary to ensure compliance. Consider this your final warning." Sarah and I laughed when we read it. What could Linda possibly do? We had legal protection, historical designation, and property rights on our side. We never imagined she would actually destroy the well with concrete. But as I stood there watching the last of the concrete pour into my beautiful well, I realized Linda had declared war. And she had no idea that she was fighting someone who had the power to shut off her entire neighborhood's water supply. You see, what Linda didn't know, what none of the HOA board knew, was that I wasn't just a random homeowner. I was a retired city engineer who had spent 20 years working on municipal water systems. And when we bought the house, I had carefully researched all the utility easements and water rights connected to the property. That research had revealed something very interesting. The original land developer, back in the 1950s, had made a deal with the city. In exchange for permission to build the subdivision, he had to allow the main water line to run underground through what was now my property. The easement contract gave the landowner, me, the legal right to control access to that water line. Specifically, the contract stated that if the landowner ever revoked permission for the easement, the city was required to immediately shut off water service to the entire subdivision until the matter was resolved in court. It was an old provision designed to protect the original landowner's rights. But it was still legally binding. And now that Linda had destroyed my well and cut off my private water source, I had grounds to revoke that easement. As the concrete truck drove away and Linda strutted off like she had won some great victory, I pulled out my phone and called my old friend Mike at the city water department. "Mike, it's Tom Peterson. Remember that easement we talked about when I bought the house? Well, I think it's time to activate it." Mike laughed. "What did the HOA do now?" "They filled my well with concrete." There was a long pause. "They did what?" "Tom, that well is on the historic registry. That's illegal destruction of protected property." "I know. And now I want to revoke the water easement. How quickly can you shut off service to the subdivision?" Another pause. "If you file the revocation paperwork, we're required to cut service within 24 hours. But Tom, that's going to affect 200 families. Are you sure you want to go nuclear?" I looked at the concrete-filled hole where my beautiful well used to be. "Mike, they brought concrete to a water fight. Time to show them who really controls the flow around here." "All right, I'll send you the paperwork. But Tom, you might want to warn your neighbors first. They're about to learn a very expensive lesson about HOA overreach." That evening, I sent a simple email to the entire neighborhood mailing list. "Dear Willowbrook Gardens residents, due to the HOA's destruction of protected private property on my land, I am exercising my legal right to revoke the municipal water easement that runs through my property. Per the original subdivision contract, city water service to all homes will be suspended in 24 hours until this matter is resolved in court. I suggest you contact your HOA board for an explanation of why they chose to create this crisis. Sincerely, Tom Peterson." Then Sarah and I sat back and waited for the chaos to begin. It didn't take long. Within an hour, our phones started ringing. Neighbors who had never spoken to us before were calling, confused and panicked. "What easement? What water suspension? What's going on?" I politely explained the situation to each caller. The HOA had illegally destroyed my historic well. As the property owner, I had the right to control access to the water line that ran under my land. Until the HOA made this right, there would be no water service to the neighborhood. Some callers were angry at me. Others were angry at Linda. But by the end of the evening, everyone was talking about it. The neighborhood group chat exploded with messages. "Is this real? Are they really shutting off our water? What kind of HOA destroys someone's well? How is this legal? Linda, what did you do?" But Linda stayed silent. No responses, no explanations, no damage control. I think she was starting to realize that she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning was Saturday. I woke up early and made coffee using the last water from our emergency storage tank. Then I sat on my front porch and waited for the show to begin. At exactly 8 a.m., the city water crew arrived. I watched them locate the main shutoff valve and turn off service to the entire subdivision. Within minutes, the first scream started. "My shower just stopped working. The toilets won't flush. What happened to the water pressure?" By 9 a.m., there was a crowd gathering outside Linda's house. Angry neighbors demanding answers. Parents with small children asking where they were supposed to get drinking water. Elderly residents worried about medications that needed to be mixed with water. Linda finally emerged from her house at 10 a.m., looking flustered and overwhelmed. She tried to calm everyone down with her usual authoritative tone, but it wasn't working this time. "This is temporary," she announced. "Tom Peterson is having a tantrum about community improvements, but we'll get this sorted out." "A tantrum?" shouted one neighbor. "You destroyed his well. Of course he's mad." "Why didn't you tell us this could happen?" yelled another. "How long until we get water back?" Linda couldn't answer any of their questions because she didn't understand what she had done. She thought she was dealing with a minor HOA violation, not a major municipal contract dispute. That's when I decided to join the conversation. I walked over to the crowd outside Linda's house, carrying a folder full of documents. Everyone turned to look at me, some angry, some curious, some desperate for answers. "I know you all have questions," I said calmly. "Let me explain what's happening." I pulled out the original subdivision contract from 1955 and held it up so everyone could see the official seal. When this neighborhood was built, the developer made a deal with the city. The main water line had to run through private property, my property. In exchange, the landowner got permanent control over access to that line. I showed them the relevant section of the contract, highlighted in yellow. If the landowner revokes permission for the easement, the city must immediately shut off water service until the dispute is resolved. That's exactly what happened this morning. The crowd was quiet now, listening carefully. "Yesterday, your HOA president illegally destroyed a protected historic structure on my property. She filled my 150-year-old well with concrete without permission, without legal authority, and without considering the consequences." I looked directly at Linda, who was standing behind the crowd looking pale and shaken. "So I revoked the easement. And the water stays off until this is made right." One neighbor raised her hand. "What would it take to turn the water back on?" I had my answer ready. 3 things. First, Linda and the HOA board must publicly apologize for destroying protected property. Second, they must pay for complete restoration of my well by certified historic preservation contractors. Third, they must establish new policies preventing any future interference with private property rights. "How much will the restoration cost?" someone asked. "The estimate is $85,000. Plus legal fees." The crowd gasped. Several people turned to glare at Linda. $85,000? One man shouted. "Linda, do you realize what you've done?" But Linda wasn't backing down. She pushed through the crowd and faced me directly. "Tom, you can't hold the entire neighborhood hostage over one old well. This is ridiculous." "Linda," I replied calmly, "I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm exercising my legal property rights. You chose to destroy my well. I chose to protect my water access. Actions have consequences." A woman with 3 young children stepped forward. "How long can this go on? My kids need water." I felt bad for the families caught in the middle, but this wasn't my fault. The water can be restored as soon as the HOA agrees to my terms. Every day they delay is another day without service. That's when the crowd turned on Linda completely. "Just pay for the well repair. You caused this mess, now fix it. How could you be so stupid? We didn't vote for any of this." Linda tried to maintain control, but her authority was crumbling. "The HOA doesn't have $85,000 in our budget for frivolous repairs." "Frivolous?" I laughed. "Linda, you destroyed a protected historic structure. That's a federal crime. The repair cost is the least of your problems." I pulled out another document from my folder. "I've already filed a complaint with the FBI's art crime team. Destruction of historic property is taken very seriously." Linda's face went white. She clearly hadn't considered the criminal implications of her actions. The crowd was getting more agitated by the minute. People were taking out their phones, calling lawyers, recording everything. Linda's carefully controlled HOA kingdom was falling apart in real time. Finally, a man I recognized as board treasurer spoke up. "Linda, we need to call an emergency board meeting. This is way beyond anything we signed up for." Linda nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Emergency meeting at 2 p.m. in the clubhouse." As the crowd dispersed, several neighbors approached me privately. They apologized for not standing up to Linda sooner. They admitted they had thought she was too controlling but never imagined she would do something this extreme. One elderly woman squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for fighting back. Someone needed to show her that she can't just do whatever she wants." The emergency board meeting that afternoon was unlike anything Willowbrook Gardens had ever seen. The clubhouse was packed beyond capacity, with neighbors standing in the aisles and spilling out into the parking lot. Linda called the meeting to order, but she had clearly lost control of the situation. Board members were whispering frantically among themselves. Residents were shouting questions and demands. "Order! Order!" Linda banged her gavel repeatedly. "We need to discuss this water situation calmly and rationally." But there was nothing calm about 200 families without running water. The board treasurer, a nervous man named Gary, stood up and read from a prepared statement. The board acknowledges that yesterday's well maintenance operation may have been premature. We are exploring options for resolving the current water service interruption. May have been premature? Shouted someone from the back. You destroyed a historic landmark. How do you explore options for turning our water back on? Just pay for the well repair. Linda stood up and tried to regain control. The board cannot authorize expenditures of this magnitude without proper procedures. We need time to review our legal options and insurance coverage. That's when I stood up and addressed the room. Linda, there are no legal options. You committed a crime. You destroyed protected property. You violated federal historic preservation laws. The only question is whether you're going to fix this voluntarily or wait for the courts to force you. I held up my phone. I have the FBI art crime team on speed dial. I have a federal prosecutor interested in this case. I have documentary evidence of everything that happened. The room was dead silent. But I'm not interested in sending anyone to prison. I just want my well restored and assurance that this will never happen again. Linda's lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. Mr. Peterson, what exactly are you proposing? I had my terms ready. Complete restoration of the well using certified historic preservation contractors. Public written apology from the HOA board. New policies requiring membership vote before any action affecting private property. And coverage of all my legal costs. And the water service? Gary asked hopefully. Gets restored immediately upon signing the agreement. The lawyer whispered something to Linda. She shook her head stubbornly, but I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. The board needs time to discuss this privately, Linda announced. No, said a voice from the crowd. It was Margaret Chin, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. We've had enough private discussions. This vote happens now in public where we can all see it. The crowd erupted in agreement. Vote now. Vote now. Linda tried to maintain her authority one last time. The board cannot be pressured into hasty decisions by mob rule. Mob rule? Margaret laughed. Linda, you destroyed someone's property without asking anyone. That's the definition of mob rule. Another resident stood up. I move that we vote Linda off the board immediately for gross misconduct. Seconded, came voices from around the room. You can't do that. Linda protested. I haven't violated any HOA bylaws. I stood up again. Actually, Linda, destruction of member property is grounds for immediate removal under Section 12 of your own bylaws. Linda's face flushed red. She was trapped and she knew it. The vote was swift and overwhelming. Linda was removed from the board by a margin of 187 to 3. Gary was elected temporary president, and his first official act was to accept my terms for well restoration. Within 2 hours, I had signed paperwork authorizing the city to restore water service. By evening, every faucet in Willowbrook Gardens was flowing again. But Linda wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. Linda was suing me personally for economic terrorism and abuse of property rights. She claimed I had illegally disrupted public utilities and demanded $500,000 in damages. I called my lawyer, Jim Rodriguez, and read him the lawsuit over the phone. Jim was quiet for a moment, then burst out laughing. Tom, this is the dumbest lawsuit I've seen in 20 years. She destroyed your property, and now she's suing you for protecting your rights? This is going to get dismissed so fast it'll make her head spin. Should I be worried? I asked. The only thing you should worry about is whether you want to countersue for malicious prosecution. Because that's exactly what this is. The lawsuit made local news. The headline read, Former HOA President Sues Homeowner After Destroying Historic Well. The story included photos of my concrete-filled well and quotes from neighbors supporting my actions. Linda's lawyer withdrew from the case within a week. Apparently, he had done some research and realized his client had no legal standing whatsoever. Meanwhile, the well restoration was proceeding smoothly. The historic preservation contractors were amazing. They carefully removed every bit of concrete while protecting the original stonework. It was like watching archaeological surgery. The process took 3 weeks, but when it was finished, the well was more beautiful than ever. The contractors had even discovered and restored some original decorative elements that had been covered up decades ago. The city held a small ceremony to rededicate the well as a protected historic landmark. The mayor spoke about the importance of preserving local history. Several neighbors attended and thanked me for standing up to Linda's overreach. But the best part was watching Linda's house go up for sale the week after the ceremony. She couldn't afford the legal costs and HOA assessment fees. She moved out quietly with no goodbye party or farewell letter. The new HOA board, led by Gary, implemented major reforms. All property-related decisions now required membership votes. Board meetings became transparent and collaborative. The threatening letters and frivolous citations stopped completely. 6 months later, I was sitting by my restored well on a beautiful spring morning when my new neighbor, the family who bought Linda's old house, stopped by to introduce themselves. "We heard about what happened with the previous HOA," the husband said. "We want you to know we think you did the right thing. Communities need people who are willing to stand up to bullies." His wife added, "Our realtor told us the whole story. She said this neighborhood is much better now that people learned you can't just destroy other people's property without consequences." Their kids were fascinated by the well. I showed them how the hand pump worked and explained how people used to get water before modern plumbing. They thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. As I write this, it's been 2 years since the concrete truck incident. The well is still flowing, still beautiful, still serving as a reminder that some things are worth fighting for. I learned that standing up to bullies isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting everyone who comes after you. Linda's unchecked power had been growing for years, and no one had been willing to challenge her until she finally went too far. But I also learned that having the right documentation and legal knowledge can be more powerful than any HOA president with a clipboard. Linda thought she could destroy my property because she had authority. She forgot that property rights are more fundamental than HOA rules. The neighborhood is peaceful now. The new board focuses on genuine community improvements rather than petty control. People feel free to express opinions without fear of retaliation. And children still gather around the historic well, amazed that something so old and beautiful almost got destroyed by someone who thought conformity was more important than history. Sometimes I still see concrete trucks in the neighborhood, but now they're working on actual construction projects approved by the community. And every time I hear that familiar rumble, I smile and remember the day one HOA president learned that actions have consequences. The most important lesson? When someone with authority tries to destroy something you value, don't just complain, cut off their power at the source. In my case, that source happened to be water. But the principle applies everywhere. Bullies only have as much power as we give them. And remember, before you pour concrete over someone else's rights, make sure you understand who really controls the flow.